You're not tired because life is hard. You're tired because something is feeding off your energy. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, every time you hold space for chaos that doesn't belong to you, you leak, and they feed. Not just people, but systems, expectations, patterns, emotional contracts you never agreed to. This isn't about being sensitive. This is about being hijacked because your presence has become a product. Your energy, your attention, your emotional labor, your availability is being mined like a resource. You're not exhausted because you're broken. You're exhausted because they've trained you to confuse over-functioning with love and silence with safety. But this isn't safe. It's spiritual depletion masked as a life. And if you felt that numbness creeping in, like you're disappearing inside your own story, you're not crazy. You're just waking up. Most people don't notice when it happens, that quiet erosion of self that doesn't look like destruction. It looks like being helpful, being reliable, being the one who's always there. And little by little, your presence is no longer something people cherish. It becomes something they expect. That shift is subtle. At first, it feels like a connection. But if you've ever wondered why certain relationships leave you feeling lighter while others leave you hollow, the answer is simple. It's not about love. It's about access. And access without consent is just another form of control. You weren't born to be emotionally on call, yet somehow you've become the person who replies first, apologizes most, gives, even when you're empty. They don't have to ask. They just take. Because you've been trained to offer yourself on autopilot, to fix, to smooth things over, to hold the emotional weight of every room you walk into. And the truth is, they don't want your truth. They want your predictability. They want your compliance dressed up as compassion. They want the version of you that keeps their world stable, even if it costs you your peace. And here's the hardest part. You taught them to do it, not because you're weak, but because you were conditioned to equate being needed with being loved. You thought self-sacrifice was noble. You thought holding everything together meant you were strong. But strength isn't self-erasure, and love that only survives when you disappear isn't love. It's dependency wrapped in expectation. You've been told you're too much when you express yourself and not enough when you pull away. So you hover in that anxious middle space, giving just enough to stay accepted, but never enough to feel truly seen. That's the transaction no one talks about. Not intimacy, but access, a quiet exchange where your time, your attention, your energy becomes the price of admission to relationships that were never mutual. And the more predictable you are, the easier it is for others to use you without realizing they're doing it, or worse, knowing and doing it anyway. But here's something they won't say on platforms like this because it threatens the very systems designed to keep you compliant. Some truths aren't safe for YouTube. That's why we share them in our free newsletter, Insights Academy. Sign up through the link in the description and get a free copy of The Kabbalion for a limited time only. The reason this truth hits hard is because, deep down, you felt it. You felt the way your silence gets interpreted as permission, the way your consistent effort gets taken for granted. You've watched people become confused or angry the moment you stopped being emotionally available. That wasn't an accident. That was exposure. The moment you withdraw, they no longer know who they're dealing with, because what they relied on wasn't your love, it was your pattern. People rarely connect to your essence. They connect to the role you play in their system. And when that system depends on your overgiving, any boundary you place feels like betrayal. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've disrupted the supply. And that's exactly why the most powerful thing you can do isn't to explain. It's to stop responding out of fear, to stop overcompensating, to stop leaking energy just to maintain closeness that's only there when you're performing. This isn't about cutting people off. This is about cutting the cord between your worth and your willingness to abandon yourself. You don't owe your presence to anyone who only values you when you're useful. You don't need to explain why you're no longer available for conversations that drain, for dynamics that deplete, for roles that erase. You don't need permission to rest, to pause, to disappear for a while, and let your absence do what your words never could. Because what you're reclaiming isn't distance, it's discernment. And the people who deserve your energy won't demand it, they'll respect it. The rest will reveal themselves the second you stop being convenient. There's a version of you the world applauds, the one who always says yes, the one who makes space, softens their tone, offers comfort, even when you're the one bleeding. You've been praised for being so strong, so understanding, so dependable. But what they're really admiring isn't your strength, it's your suppression. They're celebrating your self-abandonment. Because somewhere along the way, you were trained to see overgiving as virtue and saying no as a flaw. They call you selfless, but they never ask what it costs you to be that way. Because generosity in its true form is powerful. But what you're doing isn't generosity, it's programming. It's the result of years of being rewarded for putting others first. Even when it drained you, you were never asked what you needed, only what you could give. And so you learned to trade your peace for proximity, your energy for acceptance, your truth for approval. You called it love, but it was survival. You called it kindness, but it was compulsion. You've been conditioned to override the quiet signals from your body. The fatigue, you rationalize. The tension, you ignored. That inner resistance you pushed past, because you didn't want to seem difficult, selfish, dramatic. But none of those were flaws. They were alarms, signs that your energy was being spent in places it didn't belong. But the world doesn't want you to listen to those signs. It wants you agreeable, available, and easy to access. Because when you're always reachable, you're always exploitable. This is the energy trap. They don't talk about that. You can go through your whole life being good, being needed, being useful, and still feel empty. Not because you haven't done enough, but because doing too much became your identity. You were taught to see exhaustion as evidence of effort, as proof of your worth. So even when your tank is empty, you keep going. Not because you have more to give, but because you don't know how to stop. You don't know who you are when you're not performing your usefulness. But here's what no one told you. Your worth was never supposed to be transactional. You don't need to prove your value through depletion. You don't have to keep showing up at the cost of your sanity just to keep the peace. The people who only appreciate you when you're sacrificing something vital aren't your community. They're your dependency loop. And that loop is fed by a belief you've never been allowed to question, that love must always look like self-denial. It doesn't. In fact, real love doesn't require you to shrink, to soften, to override. It doesn't expect you to abandon yourself, to be chosen. It chooses you when you're whole, when you're rested, when you're honest. And if your relationships can't hold your no, your rest, your boundaries, your silence, then they were never holding you. They were holding what you offered. And that's the difference between love and utility. So ask yourself, when was the last time you gave something that didn't cost you peace? When was the last time your yes didn't come from guilt, fear, or habit? When did generosity stop being sacred and start being compulsive? These are the questions that open the door to healing. Not healing as in fixing what's broken, but remembering what was buried. Your energy was never meant to be a constant offering. It was meant to be honored, guarded, chosen with intention, not handed out like spare change to anyone who asks nicely. The system isn't going to reward you for waking up. It benefits from your fatigue. It profits off your guilt. It thrives when you stay stuck in the role of the ever-giving, ever-pleasing, ever-performing version of yourself. But you don't have to play that role anymore. You don't need applause for self-erasure. What you need is your own permission to stop, to rest, to pull back. Not because you're bitter or closed off, but because you finally understand this giving isn't a virtue when it's rooted in fear. And love isn't real if it only exists when you're running on empty. There's a moment that changes everything. It doesn't come with lightning or loud revelations. It comes in silence, in stillness. When you finally step back far enough to see clearly, and what you see is this. Most people weren't close to you. They were close to the version of you that served their needs, the fixer, the reliable one, the one who always answered, always showed up, always made space, even when you were collapsing inside. And when you stop performing that version, their affection doesn't shift. It disappears. You weren't chosen. You were useful. It's a brutal realization, one that shatters the illusion of intimacy, because what you thought was love was really attachment to a role you never auditioned for, but played perfectly. Not because you wanted to deceive anyone, but because somewhere along the way, you learned that being needed felt safer than being seen. So you became what people wanted. You anticipated their needs before they voiced them. You kept the peace, made them feel good, kept things light, manageable, digestible. You made yourself a comfort zone, even if it cost you your truth. But here's the truth that cuts through the noise. Being needed is not the same as being loved. And you cannot be truly loved if people don't know who you are without your usefulness. Real love sees the parts of you that aren't convenient. It honors your no as much as your yes. But you'll never experience that if you keep holding on to relationships that only work when you're giving more than you receive. And the people who love the role, they'll feel betrayed the moment you stop playing it. Not because you did something wrong, but because their comfort was tied to your performance. They don't miss you. They miss the benefits. And this is where the guilt trap tries to pull you back in. You've changed. You're selfish. Now, you don't care like you used to. These aren't reflections of who you are. They're confessions of who they needed you to stay. You were never their friend. You were their stability, their therapist, their emotional insurance policy. And when you reclaim your time, your silence, your sovereignty, it destabilizes the dynamic. They call it distance, disconnection, but what it really is clarity. And clarity is a threat to any relationship built on projection, because people don't want to meet the real you. They want the version that validates them, comforts them, supports their story. And when you refuse to play along, when you break the narrative, when you let the silence stretch long enough to expose the truth, they'll either evolve or exit. Let them. You're not obligated to continue performing in a story that's killing your spirit. You're allowed to outgrow the dynamics you once survived in. You're allowed to stop proving your worth through emotional labor. And you're allowed to say, I'm not this role. I never was. I'm done pretending. Because the truth is, you've never really been seen, not fully. You've been mirrored, reflected back through other people's desires, wounds, expectations. And now that the mirror's cracked, now that you've stepped away from the spotlight, the question that remains isn't, will they still love me? It's who am I when I'm not performing? That's where it begins. The remembering, the returning, not to who they told you to be, but to who you were before. Before the role swallowed your name, before your silence became a strategy, before your smile became a mask. You're not a version, you're not a role, you're not a reflection. You're a whole sovereign being worthy of love that doesn't require exhaustion as proof. Let the roles collapse. Let the expectations crumble. Let the projections fall apart. Because what's left, after all the pretending dies, is you. And that, finally, is enough. We live in a culture addicted to noise, opinions, reactions, hot takes, group chats, notifications, constant stimulation that convinces you silence is awkward, distance is rude, and not responding is a sign of weakness. But let's be honest, your reactions have been bleeding you dry. Every time you jump to reply, to explain, to clarify what you meant, to defend your boundaries, to soothe someone else's discomfort, you leak. And the worst part, you start mistaking your exhaustion for empathy. You've been told silence is passive. But the truth is, silence is resistance. Stillness is strategy. Withdrawing your energy from what doesn't serve you isn't avoidance, it's precision. Because the more you respond to things that don't deserve your attention, the more entangled you become in energies that dilute your power. Reaction is how they bait you back into the role. Discipline is how you stay free. When you stop reacting, people start showing their cards. You begin to see how much of their power relied on your participation. That's the uncomfortable truth. Most control is a dance, and your role was choreography. When you stop moving, the illusion falls apart. Because silence isn't just an absence of noise. It's a message. And it says, I'm no longer playing the part you assigned me. That's when the projection cracks. The fixer stops fixing. The peacekeeper stops smoothing. The one who always picked up the phone doesn't pick up anymore. And suddenly, the dynamic collapses under the weight of its own imbalance. They call you cold, distant, difficult. But what they really mean is, I can't access you like I used to. Good. That's the point. Stillness starves the system. It's a boundary without explanation. It's a refusal to be baited. It's choosing not to perform your own exhaustion for the comfort of others. And in that quiet, something profound happens. You begin to hear yourself again. Not the voice trained to placate, to please, to predict everyone's needs, but the voice that says, "This is not mine to carry." Every conversation you don't entertain, every argument you don't attend, every situation you walk away from without justification is an avoidance, it's a reclamation. You're not here to convince people of your boundaries. You're here to honor them. And silence is one of the most powerful tools you have. Not responding doesn't make you cruel. It makes you clear. You don't owe anyone your reaction, especially when their intention isn't connection, but control. Especially when they're not engaging with your truth. Just their idea of you. You can't be free and constantly available. You can't stay grounded and endlessly accessible. Something has to give, and it can no longer be you. That's why stillness is terrifying to the system, because a quiet mind can't be manipulated. A silent presence can't be pulled. Stillness isn't weakness. It's a threat. It says, I see what this is, and I'm no longer interested. You've been told to stay in the room, to keep explaining, to keep trying. But what if the real strength is in the exit? What if power isn't in how much you say, but in how much you no longer feel the need to explain? What if the most radical thing you can do is not respond? That's the moment everything starts to change. Because when you pull back from the noise, the neediness, the pull to perform, you stop leaking. You stop burning out. You stop contorting yourself to be palatable. And you start remembering what clarity feels like. What boundaries feel like. What peace feels like. Stillness is not the absence of effort. It's the presence of alignment. When you choose silence, you're not disappearing. You're reappearing as your whole self. And not everyone will like that. Not everyone will stay. Let them go. Because your energy was never meant to be scattered across 100 false obligations. It was meant to be held, directed, honored. And from now on, it will be. You've been misidentified more times than you can count. Not because you're unclear, but because people aren't seeing you. They're seeing the version of you they need. And most of the time, they need you. Soft when you're angry, quiet when you're clear, agreeable when you're awake. So they edit you in their minds, shave off your edges, repaint your intentions, and expect you to stay inside the version they've constructed. But here's the thing, when you stop conforming to their vision, they'll say, you changed. No, you just stopped shrinking. It's hard to admit, but a lot of the relationships you once held sacred weren't built on truth. They were built on familiarity, predictability, and mutual illusions. You thought they liked you because of who you are, but really, they liked who you were, for them. The role, the consistency, the fact that you kept showing up, even when you were breaking down in silence. And now, when you step out of the performance, they call it disloyalty, but it's not. It's clarity. You're not betraying them. You're revealing the betrayal you were living through. They never loved your truth. They loved your silence, your compliance. The way you adapted to their moods, their needs, their expectations, the way you adjusted your tone, your energy, your availability. And the moment you stop doing that, the discomfort they feel gets projected onto you. Suddenly, you're difficult, cold, unrecognizable. Not because you've become any of those things, but because you're finally unfiltered. This is the part no one talks about. How painful it is to be misread while standing in your truth. How disorienting it feels to have people rewrite your intentions. When you stop being the emotional caretaker, they don't ask why you pulled back. They assume. They don't check in with your heart. They judge because your boundary broke their narrative. And now, they need to make you the villain in their story to protect the lie they were living. But let that discomfort be the teacher. If your authenticity triggers their rejection, then the connection was built on your suppression. And no matter how painful it is to lose relationships like that, it's more painful to keep living inside someone else's projection. You can't build a real life based on a role. Let people misinterpret you, let them whisper, let them be uncomfortable. Because when you start living as your full self, not everyone will clap. Not everyone will stay. Some only ever love the echo of you, not the core. And that's okay, because the version of you they needed wasn't real. But you are. You are not here to be digestible. You are not here to be someone's fantasy of stability. You are not here to play small, to keep fragile egos intact. You are here to be true. And truth doesn't always fit neatly into other people's expectations. Your clarity will cost you people. Your silence will confuse them. Your boundaries will make them uncomfortable. But none of that is your problem to fix. You are not responsible for how people respond to the loss of your performance. And if there's one thing you need to remember, it's this. Real connection doesn't require distortion. It welcomes your truth. It holds space for your edges. It doesn't shatter when you stop performing. And the more you honor that truth, the more you attract people who do the same. Not those who seek versions of you, but those who seek you. So let the projections collapse. Let the edits unravel. Let the masks fall away. Because the real you, the one you've buried under layers of pleasing, adapting, and shrinking, is worth being seen fully, fiercely. Finally, every moment you gave away your presence, you made a transaction. You didn't get paid in cash, but something was taken all the same. A little calm here, a bit of clarity there, a slow drip of your life force exchanged for validation, comfort, or just the illusion of connection. But no one told you to track it. No one said that wasn't just 5 minutes on the phone. That was 5 minutes of your focus, your breath, your soul. Because energy isn't measured the way we measure money. It's stolen in subtler ways. Every yes you didn't mean. Every time you showed up to fix something no one was fixing for you. Every time you absorbed someone else's pain because it was easier than facing your own cost. That cost accumulates. It builds in your body. It becomes the exhaustion you can't explain, the resentment you can't voice, the fog you live in that no self-help quote can lift. And yet, we still pretend we're just busy or overwhelmed or going through a phase. No, you're energetically bankrupt. And the system prefers you that way, because someone profits every time you don't protect your energy. Not just the individuals pulling from you, but the larger forces. The productivity machine that thrives on your inability to rest. The consumer culture that benefits from your spiritual emptiness. The networks that monetize your outrage. It's a loop. Drain, distract, sell you a false fix, and repeat. They've convinced you that being always on is virtuous, that availability is love, that burning out is noble. So you answer the late messages. You absorb the energy in rooms you don't belong in. You keep giving, 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 until your nervous system starts to fray, until you can't tell the difference between being wanted and being used. But the truth is, your energy was never meant to be on tap. It's not a public utility. It's sacred. And every time you offer it without discernment, you teach others to treat it as disposable. That's not humility. That's self-erasure disguised as generosity. And when you finally start to pull back, it feels unnatural. You'll feel guilty for resting, for saying no, for not explaining. But that guilt isn't a signal you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're detoxing from a system that normalized your depletion. This is where discernment becomes power. You begin to ask, who feels lighter after being around me? And who leaves me feeling drained? What conversations spark me? Which ones suck the soul out of me? You stop confusing chaos for chemistry, drama for depth, attention for intimacy. And that shift alone will change your entire life. Because the truth is not. Everyone deserves access to your energy. Not every interaction is equal. Some people are not connecting, they're feeding. And your emotional availability isn't an act of love when it's being consumed without reciprocity. It's self-harm. With a smile, let that land, then let yourself grieve. Grieve the years you spent overextending, the people you bent for, the silence you accepted in return. It wasn't a weakness. It was survival. You didn't know then what you know now. But now you see it. You feel the pull when it starts. You recognize the weight in your chest when your energy begins to leak. And for the first time, you pause, you breathe. You say no, not with rage, but with reverence, because your energy is your life force. It's your magic, your clarity, your presence. And from this point forward, you don't give it away like spare change. You spend it like gold, rare, powerful, and only where it truly belongs. You were never meant to be wide open all the time. Accessible, available, approachable. The world tells you that openness is virtuous, that love means letting everyone in, that kindness means never closing the door. But openness without discernment isn't love. It's exposure. And when you're constantly exposed, you're constantly leaking. The world starts shaping you, not through force, but through small permissions you never consciously gave. Every time you say yes to something that leaves you drained, that's not kindness. It's slow self-abandonment. You've been told that boundaries are selfish. But let's be honest, that lie benefits everyone who's been over-consuming your energy. The people who get the most uncomfortable when you say no are the ones who relied on your inability to do so. And the reason setting boundaries feels like loss is because it often is. But it's not a loss of love. It's a loss of imbalance, of one-sidedness, of being needed more than you were ever truly known. Real boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. They don't shut life out. They allow in only what's aligned. But to get there, you have to start by telling the truth. And that truth might sound like, I'm not available for this version of connection anymore. Or I no longer feel safe performing emotional CPR for people who won't take responsibility for their own healing. Or even more simply, I don't have the capacity for this right now. You don't owe anyone deeper reasoning than that. Because here's what no one tells you. Your peace is not a group project. Your energy is not a shared resource. And your presence is not a default setting for whoever demands it the loudest. When you treat it that way, you teach others that your time and emotional bandwidth are for rent. But when you begin to filter your interactions not with bitterness, but with clarity, the dynamic changes. It's in the act of reclaiming your space that the truth of your relationships comes forward. Some people only loved you because you were easy to access. Some only stayed because you never said no. When you begin to say no, when you begin to pause before responding, when you start measuring what's being asked of you against your actual capacity, you'll watch certain relationships shift. Not because you changed, but because you stopped bleeding yourself out to stay loved. And this is the part that stings. Many people were only loyal to your availability, not to your essence. When you became less accessible, they didn't adapt, they vanished. Let them. You're not losing connection. You're losing the illusion of connection. The truth is, boundaries aren't just for protecting you from others. They're also for protecting you from yourself, from your habits of overgiving, over-explaining, overextending, from the version of you that was trained to be loved through sacrifice. That version helped you survive. But it can't take you where you're going. Where you're going up doesn't require exhaustion. Presence doesn't require performance. Connection doesn't require contortion. It requires you to be full, grounded, and real. That can only happen when you trust your no as much as you've trusted your yes. Your energy isn't infinite, and the people who truly care about you won't ask you to live like it is. You teach people how to treat you not just by what you allow, but by what you consistently reinforce. That means saying no without guilt. That means letting silence speak when words feel forced. That means walking away not to punish, but to preserve. This isn't about building walls. It's about coming home to yourself. It's about creating enough space between your truth and their expectations to actually hear your own voice again. It's about subtracting what doesn't nourish so what does can finally breathe. And when the filters are in place, you'll start to notice something. You won't need to work so hard to be loved. You'll stop performing. You'll stop chasing. You'll simply be. And that's when the right people find you, not the ones addicted to your energy, but the ones aligned with your soul. Most people think power is loud, that reclaiming yourself looks like fire, fury, and confrontation. But the real shift, it's almost silent. It happens in the stillness between impulse and action. The moment you want to explain yourself and don't. The time someone crosses a line, and instead of rationalizing it, you walk away. That's the rebellion. That's the revolution. It doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it just looks like not answering a message, not chasing an apology, not playing the role anymore. When you start protecting your energy, you don't become hard. You become clear. You begin to move differently, less reaction or observation. You notice what used to trigger you now passes by without a rise in your chest. You realize your absence speaks louder than your arguments ever did. That silence, not noise, is often the most honest response you can offer. And this is where the real change begins. Because what you're actually reclaiming isn't just time or boundaries. It's your life force, the deep reservoir of presence, purpose, and clarity that was buried under years of overstimulation and emotional debt. And the more you reclaim, the more you realize how much you were operating on autopilot, how much of your identity was tied up in reaction, how much you were offering to people who never asked, how much it cost you. You stop trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining your healing to those who only knew you through your pain. You stop performing usefulness just to feel worthy, because that's what most of us have been trained into. Usefulness. Be helpful, be needed, be pleasant, be agreeable, but never too honest, never too direct, never too whole. Because when you're whole, you're harder to manipulate. When you're present, you're less predictable. When you're aware, you're less compliant. That's why the system, whether it's societal, relational, or internal, fears your stillness. Because stillness is where you remember. It's where your truth gets loud again. And your truth doesn't scream. It doesn't need to. It just is. It knows that not everything needs a response. Not every invitation requires acceptance. Not every emotion demands expression. Sometimes power is choosing not to speak. Sometimes the highest form of self-respect is simply not engaging. That's what they won't tell you. Freedom doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like staying still while the chaos spins around you. Sometimes it's the refusal to be baited. Sometimes it's the moment you realize you're no longer trying to be anyone other than yourself. And if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just theory. You felt the burn of overextension. You've watched yourself shrink just to maintain peace. You've worn the costume of the strong one, the reliable one, the easygoing one. But you're tired. Not because you're weak. Because you're awakening. This is the transition from depletion to discernment, from reaction to presence, from performance to truth. And in that process, some things will fall away: people, roles, stories you told yourself about what you had to be in order to be loved. Let them fall. Don't chase what collapses. What's meant to stay will never ask you to betray yourself to keep it. Your energy is the gatekeeper now. You are the filter. You are the fire. Not to burn everything down, but to burn away everything that was never really you. The world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your presence. And you can't be present if you're constantly pouring into places that echo but never hold you. And if you're still unsure where to go next, start with silence. Start with stillness. Let the noise settle. Let the roles dissolve. Let your truth rise, not to shout, but to stand unbothered, unapologetic, unmistakably you. There's a moment, often quiet, often inconvenient, when you realize you're done. Not angry, not bitter, just done. Done explaining your worth. Done outsourcing your peace. Done trying to be available in spaces that never held you with care. And in that moment, something begins to shift. Not outside of you, but inside. The grip starts to loosen. The habits start to fall away. The urge to perform softens. And what takes its place is something far rarer: stillness, self-honor, sovereignty. Because this whole time, you thought you had to earn stillness. That you had to fix everything before you could rest. That you had to be everything to everyone before you could be anything to yourself. But presence was never a reward. It was a choice, one the system hoped you'd never make. Most people are too afraid to make. Because it means letting go of roles, expectations, and illusions that used to make you feel safe. But safety that costs you, your truth, is a trap. And peace built on performance is always temporary. So what now? You return to yourself. You stop being a reactor and start becoming a responder. Not every demand deserves your energy. Not every invitation deserves your time. And not every relationship deserves your continued participation. It sounds simple, but it's radical. In a culture built on overstimulation and distraction, presence is rebellion. In a world obsessed with growth and grind, rest is resistance. And in a system designed to hijack your focus, choosing your energy is the purest act of self-defense. So here's the invitation: stop leaking, stop bending, stop shaping yourself to fit into places that shrink you. Your energy isn't for sale. Your worth isn't tied to how much of yourself you give away. You're not here to carry other people's unprocessed pain. You're not a battery for their survival. You're a sovereign being. And your energy, that's your currency, your clarity, your revolution. You may lose people, but you'll find yourself. You may disappoint others, but you'll finally start honoring what you need. And you'll realize slowly, steadily, that the most dangerous version of you was never the one that fought to be seen. It was the one who stopped performing altogether. The one who sat in silence and knew they were still whole. The one who chose presence over praise, truth over approval, and alignment over belonging. If you've reached this part of the journey, you're not who you were when you started. You've seen the leaks. You've felt the weight. You've watched the projections collapse and the roles dissolve. What's left is the real you, not the useful you. Not the agreeable you, the one that's quiet and grounded and unapologetically whole. And here's where we build. Not from the ruins of old identities, but from the clarity of new truth. You get to decide who has access. You get to choose what gets your attention. You get to move in alignment, not obligation. That's not selfish. That's sacred. And if you're ready to keep walking this path, to go deeper into the hidden architecture of power, energy, and perception, sign up for our free newsletter, Insights Academy. The things we can't say here, they live there. And for a limited time, you'll also receive a free digital copy of the Kabbalion. Don't wait. Your clarity is waiting on the other side. The link is in the description. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. Understood it.